Well, hey friends, this week marks the halfway point for the season of Lent. I hope you've been following along with me as we've been reading through and meditating upon Psalm 22, what's called the Psalm of the Cross. Today we're on reading number 14 and we're looking at verse 15. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death. The psalm chronicles the scene of the crucifixion with unbelievable accuracy. As Jesus remembers it and recites it line after line, it turns out to be happening in real time around him and within him. Jesus is exhausted. He is dehydrated. Our victim on the cross is dying from multiple assaults and traumas, including a desperate lack of water. In this verse alone, we see the traumatic conditions are applied to his strength, such as dried up like a potsherd. His tongue, he cannot speak for the dryness in his mouth and the surrounding dust. As we read this account, we see that Jesus did not rise above the suffering and severity like some sort of demigod. His pain was as real for him as it would have been for us. His condition aroused the pity of someone in the crowd. A man soaked a sponge with myrrh and cheap Roman vinegar wine, put it on the end of a stick, and hoisted it to the lips of our Lord. The mixture was drugged wine, intended to help victims endure their suffering. Jesus refused. He wanted to stay alert and clear. Jesus refused to drink anything that would have dulled his senses. Later on, when he was nearing the last of his breaths, he was offered a sponge filled with only vinegar. He welcomed the sponge as it pressed against his lips. He sucked in a drink. The acidic vinegar cleared his throat and allowed him to speak his last words. The second half of this verse is astounding. And you lay me in the dust of death. We should read this very closely and understand the magnitude of what is being said by it. First, it describes death with the metaphor of dust. This is familiar in almost every Jew and Christian. The physical end of our physical bodies is dust. This is the fate of every human being as decreed by God. You are dust, and to dust you shall return. I've presided over many internment services. It's always a privilege to be with the grieving family for the final placement of the remains of their loved one. Every time I pick up the small box containing the final ashes of their loved one, most of the family gasps. It is a shock to see how the fearfully and wonderfully made body of a living man or woman or child is reduced to a small container of ashes. It is sobering. This is the dust of death. But a closer look at the verse brings us to a startling truth. The actor of the action in the verse is God. Jesus, with this psalm in mind, is praying these words to God. You have brought me to the dust of death. This means that God sent his Son to the dust to die our death. Jesus was an innocent man, and on Calvary, he was being unjustly executed. If we did a postmortem on the last week of Jesus' life, we would find that there is plenty of blame to go around. The indictments would begin with Judas, who betrayed the Son of God into the hand of the Romans. The close friends of Jesus ran from his side. Peter denied him. The fickle crowd turned against him. The Roman government was so corrupt and powerless to do the right thing. The religious authorities were in a deep state of division, compromise, and corruption. Indictments can be handed down to all. But the last half of verse 15 tells us something more. Even though there was plenty of people to blame for the way the week went down, it was God the Father who sent his Son to the cross. The executioners murdered Jesus. We can say that for sure. But we can also say that God sent him to be killed, which begs the question, why? And we'll look at that question more as we continue through this Psalm of the Cross. But one thing that is a hopeful note here is that when Jesus prays, you send me to the dust of death, there's an old axiom that says something to the effect of, if God brings you to it, he will bring you through it. And we see this truth played out in the resurrection of the Son of God. The Bible said prophesied that God would not let his Holy One see decay. And for sure, on the third day, Jesus rose from the dead. So God may have brought him to the dust of death, but he also saw him through it. And so that means that for us, for you and I, whether it is the dust of death that we get brought to, or to some kind of trial or suffering of this life, we can have this confidence that if God brings us to it, then he'll also bring us through it. So I hope that encourages you today. Have a blessed day. I'll see you tomorrow.